There's a lot of you here, and I'm going to assume that a lot of you probably have more experience than I do, but the game plan this morning is I'm going to really quickly just touch on like the history of Buddhism and what they believe, and then Marcus Willie, he spent a lot of time in Thailand, Cambodia, Myanmar, all parts of Southeast Asia. He's going to then talk about his experiences and also kind of wrap up with the idea of, well, how can we as 21st century Anabaptist Christians, how can we actually take the gospel and share it and spread it into these Buddhist or primarily Buddhist countries? And so that's our game plan for this morning. And again, I know it seems kind of odd maybe to like dig into a subject like Buddhism on a Sunday morning, but the objective here in taking a look at all of these different world religions is to basically equip ourselves, fill our spiritual toolbox or tool belt with the tools that we need to be able to fulfill the Great Commission, to be able to go into all the world and spread the gospel. That's our goal. So a little bit of quick review to begin. Firstly, we want to review really quickly what actually a religion is. And so we're going to say that a religion is essentially going to be any type of organized belief that answers life's ultimate questions. Now, life's ultimate questions are probably up for debate, but we're going to define them as these 5. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time reviewing our way through these, but basically, any group of people that tries to answer or has some sort of systematic organization for these 5 beliefs, or these 5 questions, that's going to be a religion. And so a quick review of the world's most major religions. There are many, many different religions all across the world. We're going to break it down into like a top 6. And one of them is officially not even really a religion, but we're going to include them for the sake of organization. Firstly, and these are ranked in order of what percentage of the world's population they take up. Firstly, most populous religion that we have is Christianity, coming in with about 30%. Roughly a third of the world is Christian. That includes all denominations, Catholic, Protestant, and probably those that would consider themselves maybe even just culturally a Christian. For the sake of organization, all underneath the main heading of Christian. The next one then is Islam, coming in with like 24 to 25%. Now, that one is lower than Christianity, but growing much faster than Christianity. The next one then is a pretty big drop-off, dropping all the way down to 5%. That's Hinduism, found primarily in India and Southeast Asia. Right behind them are the Buddhists, Buddhism, with 5% also found primarily in Southeast Asia, and then Judaism. Now, note that they're even less than 1%, in fact, less than 0.5%. But the reason that we kind of include them with the world's major religions is because of how important Judaism was in kind of giving birth to Christianity and even Islam as well. So we're going to retain them as one of the world's most major religions. And then lastly, we're going to kind of give ourselves a bit of a catch-all here. There's a growing percentage of the world that decided that, you know what, an organized religion really is not something for them. And so instead, they're going to voluntarily disregard religion. And we gave them all the label of secularists and gave that group just the name secularism. And we're going to give them approximately about 15.5%. And so if you're adding up all of these percentages in your head, it still only gets you to like 80-something. But again, we're just taking a look at the major religions of the world. There's still many, many more floating about there, but we're just going to say these are the major ones that we're going to take a look at. And so far, we've taken a look at Islam. Christianity, we're actually not going to be necessarily studying on its own because we do that every Sunday. And so we've taken a look at Islam. Today we're taking a look at Buddhism, and then we'll keep taking a look at the remaining ones over the next several Sundays on down the road. So our goal today, or my goal, is to take a quick look at the history and beliefs of Buddhism, and then again, Marcus is going to talk about his experiences and how to minister. So firstly, taking a look at the history of Buddhism, Buddhism has some unique origins, and I'm curious if we can kind of define why that is. It began with a man named Siddhartha Gautama. He was born in northeast India, close to like modern-day Nepal. And he was born as a very, very, very wealthy man. He was a prince, essentially, son of a king. And his dad, the king, had a bit of a limited worldview. He wanted to keep his son safe from any kind of suffering and pain. And so he essentially locked him inside of his palace, inside of his castle, so that his son would never have to actually leave and see all of the terrible things that are in the world. And so that is how Siddhartha was raised. He never saw sickness, he never saw death, he never saw a poor person. All he saw was glory. Well, eventually, as he got older, and kind of alarmingly old, by the time he was 30, only then did he actually start to venture out of his palace and take a look at how the rest of the world lives. And he actually had to sneak out, away from his dad's watching eye, sneaked out of the palace and had his first glimpse of a sick person. And you can imagine, if you're raised to never see anything like that, this sent him into a tailspin. He didn't know how to cope or how to handle this. And so over time, then, he decided that he is going to leave everything. His palace, his king and queen, mother and father. He was even married with children, decided to leave all of that as well and enter into the world and try to find some way to work against this, these ideas of pain and suffering. Surely there is some way to remove yourself from all of this, these terrible things that he just couldn't quite cope with. But anyway, so he left his palace and then went on, we would just say, a pilgrimage. He wandered and meditated and learned. Eventually, he meditated underneath a huge fig tree, and supposedly, according to legend, sat there for about 49 days in a deep state of meditation. And while he was meditating, finally, at the very tail end, he achieved what a Buddhist would call nirvana, or we could just maybe say enlightenment. Well, in this state of enlightenment, he was finally able to completely remove himself from all pain and suffering. A Buddhist doesn't necessarily believe in a certain godhead or anything like that. They believe in this impersonal force. We would use the term belief in monism, this idea that there isn't one type of deity, there's just kind of this impersonal energy, God, force that kind of binds everything together. All humans are a part of that, all plants, animals, we're all a part of that. And so finally he was able to enter back into this state, this force state. And when he was there, he was completely free of pain and suffering. He was completely above this realm. Well, Buddha then basically became the first, what a Buddhist would call bodhisattva. And I don't confess to try to even understand what that really means, but a bodhisattva, I think anyway, is a person who essentially has achieved enlightenment, but out of the goodness of his own mercy, decides to stay here in this realm for the sake of teaching others how to achieve that same enlightenment. And so he becomes the first bodhisattva. He exits out of his state of enlightenment, and right there at that spot, he preaches his first sermon. And after that, he starts to amass just a crowd of followers that came after him. And in his first sermon, he essentially told people how exactly you can achieve enlightenment as well. And this first sermon then became the key foundation, the key beliefs for pretty much all these different strains of Buddhism that are in the world today. So that's Siddhartha. He became the first Buddha. And I'm sure you've all seen those large Buddha statues. Well, that's essentially Buddha, or Siddhartha, sitting there in a state of enlightenment. And so that's how it began. Now, take a look at those dates, though. 563 through 483 BC. Those were the dates for Siddhartha, or Buddha's lifetime. Does anyone know? We're corresponding here with other dates. This is happening in northern India. What's happening in the Middle East, primarily in Israel? During this time frame, where were the children of Israel, God's representation here on earth? Where are they at this time? Anyone know? In exile. You got it. They're in Babylon. They're not necessarily serving as the image of God. And so I don't know if this is some sort of correlation here with why Buddhism became so prevalent, but either way, it's interesting that when God's people were not where they should have been, not doing what they should have been doing, that's when this incredibly dark religion spawns and starts to take over a certain portion of the world. Well, time goes on, and a certain king, or a ruler of India, actually converted to Buddhism. His name was King Ashoka, and he converted to Buddhism during a battle one time, simply because he couldn't believe all the carnage he was seeing. It's that there has to be some better way of life. And so Ashoka converts to Buddhism, and he actually, this might seem kind of strange for us to wrap our minds around, but he was a huge missionary. He decided, you know what, this is ridiculous. This religion, or this philosophy that he's undertaking here, this is amazing. And so he spread missionaries all over the world. He sent missionaries to Greece, in Europe. He sent them to the Middle East, to Egypt and North Africa. He sent them to modern-day Thailand, Southeast Asia, and so on. And so this King Ashoka guy, this is how Buddhism spread all over Southeast Asia, because he was so fervent about his belief and his idea that everyone needs to be a part of this, spread it all over the world. So between Siddhartha and King Ashoka, we now have a bunch of these Buddhist followers kind of rising up in Southeast Asia. King Ashoka was alive in like the 200s era or so, something like that. Now, right when King Ashoka was doing his thing, another development kind of occurred here. As with any organized religion, like when it's young and it's new, everyone kind of agrees and people are getting along and stuff is advancing. But give it several hundred years, and usually then things have to be defined a little bit more. Well, a question started to come up here. Many people who followed in the original Buddha, by the way, Buddha just simply means enlightened one. And so there can be many Buddhas. If you achieve enlightenment, you can be a Buddha yourself. But either way, there were people that were trying to follow the original Buddha, Siddhartha's footsteps. And they essentially became what we would view as monks. People who put aside everything else for the sake of achieving enlightenment. And then this question started to come up. Well, do you have to be a monk to achieve enlightenment? Or can enlightenment be achieved by pretty much anyone, regardless of what type of lifestyle you're living and so on? And so these two strains of Buddhism finally kind of came to a head, and they split. In today's world, there are two groups of Buddhists. One is called Mahayana Buddhism. The other one is called Theravada Buddhism. And the Theravada Buddhism, or the Buddhists, they're the ones that believe you got to be a monk. You got to live a very chaste lifestyle to be able to achieve enlightenment. Mahayana Buddhists, they believe, hey, you know what? Anyone can achieve enlightenment. And so those are the two philosophies of Buddhism. But I mean, if you would go and ask a Buddhist, specifically if they're a Theravada or a Mahayana Buddhist, they might say, you know what, I'm a bit of a hybrid of both. I lean towards Mahayana. It's pretty abstract in how Buddhism is actually practiced around the world. But think like Shia and Sunni Muslims, same idea here once again. Two key groups of Buddhists that most people kind of find themselves in. All right, now, going back to the original Buddha's sermon there, after he came out from underneath the fig tree and preached his first sermon, he preached the foundation for Buddhist beliefs. And again, around the world, Buddhists believe a lot of different things, or they practice a lot of different things. But there's kind of a few things that all Buddhists tend to agree on. It's kind of like in Christianity, we have how many different denominations of Christianity and how many different practices and lifestyles within Christianity. But for the most part, we can all agree on the fact that Jesus is God, or that Jesus died for our sins. This is the Jesus died for your sins, the core part of Buddhism here. Came again from Buddha after he exited that state of enlightenment. So basically, he preached that there are 4 things that you have to believe and then 8 things that you have to do. And so firstly, the 4 noble truths are this. Life consists of suffering. Everything is impermanent and ever-changing. The way to eliminate suffering is to eliminate desire. And lastly, desire can be eliminated by following the Eightfold Path. Now, you may have seen that wheel before as a symbol of Buddhism. And this is where this Eightfold Path comes in. The Eightfold Path are the 8 things that you have to do to be able to achieve enlightenment. And so note that there are 8 spokes on this wheel. Each of these spokes is a certain thing that you have to do to be able to enter into that state of nirvana or enlightenment. And this is now the Eightfold Path. Firstly, you have to engage in right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right awareness, and right meditation. So if you believe those 4 things, if you practice those 8 things, eventually we should be able to achieve nirvana, or to be able to completely remove ourselves from the pain and the suffering of this world and enter into that force that that God force that binds everything together. If you recall these different headings of religions that we had earlier, there's one column there called monism, all the way over to the far side. And monism essentially has, again, this idea of an impersonal force. Our issue as humans is the fact that we simply are ignorant that we can remove ourselves from this state and so on, and we can eventually do that, according to Buddhism, by following those, or believing those 4 noble truths and following the Eightfold Path. Now, again, these are the core parts of Buddhism, but what that actually looks like practically around the world, that can vary a huge amount. And so that's why Marcus is going to talk then about his experience a little bit and how he viewed Buddhism, how he saw it being practiced, and then also, again, his advice on how we, as 21st century Christians, can minister to the people that believe in this religion. Because, again, that is our goal as followers of the Great Commission. Marcus.
All right, good morning, everyone. Okay, so while he's getting that ready, I was thinking back as a little child, about 5, 6, 7 years old in my home, and in our home we had, some of you may not know this, but we had these big things called records, and they were old, even for us they were old, but on these records was these, at least as a little child, this incredible dramatization of Bible stories. And stories like, one of my favorite ones was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I was just captivated of how King Nebuchadnezzar built this golden image like 90 feet tall and proclaimed that everybody should bow down and worship it. And if you read in the Old Testament, you read about different images. The children of Israel made a golden image, a golden calf. And if you study history, Roman and Greek history, and if you go to Greece and Athens today, you can see their statues of their gods and things like that. And in my mind, I always thought that is like ancient history. It's ancient religion. Modern civilizations were not that barbaric anymore. Then in 2016, I went to Thailand, and I saw this. And this is very, very common in Thailand. They're all over the place. Huge statues of Buddha. And you can see the person there right below it, and it gives you kind of a scale of just how big this statue is. I'm not sure, a statue idol or something. And it was like my childhood memories or my childhood imaginations suddenly came true to life. A very, very different culture for sure. So, in Thailand, keep in mind these figures come off of Wikipedia, so keep that with a grain of salt, but they're fairly accurate. In Thailand itself, 95% of the population follows Buddhism. That means about 64 million people, roughly. Some figures say, I think, closer to 98%. I don't know. In either case, it's a lot of people that follow Buddhism. This means that Thailand has the second largest Buddhist population in the world, second only to China. So Zach asked me to share some of my experiences in Thailand or in Asia, working with or interacting with Buddhism or with Buddhist people. So one of the things that I was able to do or able to observe a little bit was some of their festivals. They have a lot of festivals, Buddhist festivals, and if I'm not mistaken, I think one of the biggest ones is one called Loi Krathron, and essentially it's also known as the Floating Lantern Festival. So once a year, and I'm not sure, I think this might be around the Buddhist New Year or something, I'm not 100% sure, but once a year this is a huge festival that thousands of people participate in. And what they're doing is they take a little boat, made out of a little bit of rice paper, and with a candle in it, and they'll put it on a river and let it float down the river. And to them, it's like letting go of their anger or their hatred or their bad decisions they made the past year. It's almost like a purification ceremony that they're letting go, and for the new year. I guess maybe the closest thing we might have is a New Year's resolution, but it's not really the same. Some people will even put in parts of their hair or their fingernails into the boat and let it go. And the idea there is it symbolizes letting go of their mistakes or their negative thoughts or something like that. And the idea is that this will bring them an enlightened mind or perhaps good fortune. So something else that happens at the same time as this lantern festival or this floating lantern festival is this right here. And again, this is all part of the same festival. So they'll take these lanterns and send them off. And the whole idea here is that you're launching your bad luck or your past bad luck or your past mistakes into the air. You're releasing them into the oblivion. And they believe that if your lantern disappears into the darkness, before the light goes out, that will bring you extremely good luck for the next year. However, if your lantern crashes, and I've seen a lot of lanterns crash, then your year is going to be full of bad luck. So this was a very unique experience for me to go out and actually not participate in, but witness it. I have never seen so many people crowded into one place at one time. I think this picture here was taken on a bridge, like a 2-lane bridge, and it was so tight that, I couldn't move my arms out like this. And so me and actually Megan's brother Bryson walked across this bridge, and it was like you just kind of had to go with the people, and if you wanted to go back, you couldn't. It was just no way. Another experience that I had in Thailand was for about 6 or 8 weeks, I think something like that. Twice a week, me and a couple other guys would go into the Buddhist temples, and some temples had what they called monk chats. And the idea of a monk chat is usually there's tables set up, and the idea is that these monks, they want to learn English. They want to practice their English. And so they sit here at these tables and let foreigners come up and talk to them and ask them questions. And foreigners, like myself, we can learn about Buddhism. We can learn about what they believe, their culture, whatever questions you want to ask. And the monks, it's pretty cool. They get to practice their English because they want to learn English. Now, it's not really set up as, it's not really designed for people to come and witness to them, but, goodness, we took opportunity there. So we did that twice a week, and we ran into some very interesting situations sometimes. Now, if you're wondering, how is this relevant to 21st century America? Do we have a lot of Buddhists here? Probably not, but one thing I realized was that our secular culture is being heavily influenced by the Buddhist worldview, their ideology, and their mindset, even though they're not specifically converting to Buddhism. One of the monk chats, and I think it was where this picture was taken, this is not the monk chat, I did not have any pictures of monk chats, but at this temple, on this temple compound was a monk chat, and half of the building was set up with tables, and the other half was like a big conference room with glass doors. And while we were chatting with the monks, over here was oftentimes a lot of tourists, and they were participating in like a meditation retreat or something like that. They were being instructed by a monk in how to become enlightened, how to whatever they do. And sometimes you look over there and you see them in very weird, prostrate, whatever, laying on the floor doing their, I guess, becoming woke, I don't know. But in either case, there's a lot of tourists that come, young tourists, my age or younger, that travel through Asia, and they are heavily influenced by the ideology of Buddhism and the worldview of Buddhism. And so it does have a huge effect on our culture today, much more than I realized. There is a certain there's a certain people group, I guess, that actually travel to Asia, and we call them trekkers. So if you're old enough to remember the 60s and the hippies, well, the hippies have grandchildren. And those are the trekkers that, instead of going to Woodstock, they travel through Southeast Asia. And so they're very anti-authoritism, they're anti-religion, they're don't tell me what to do, I want to do whatever I want. And as a result, that fits perfectly within the Buddhist worldview of no deity, no God, no authority, no accountability. It's me, myself, and I. And so it is very, very influential. I remember at a monk chat, we had a very interesting conversation, or a very interesting incident, I guess. So we were sitting down, me and a couple of the guys sitting down there, we're talking to these monks. I don't remember how the conversation was going, but I do remember these monks were asking us questions about Christianity. And I could tell that this monk was struggling with it. He didn't believe it. To him, it was such a foreign idea and such a foreign concept. Just wasn't getting anywhere. And all at once, kind of to my left I heard this American voice. He was like, "It's all in your imagination. You think you talk to God, it's just your imagination. It's not real." And I looked, I was like, what in the world? This guy's rude. I mean, in Thailand, people aren't rude. People are very, very polite. This was out of the ordinary. And I looked, I was like, and here's this American guy, this older guy, probably in his 60s. And here, he comes over every year, and he volunteers at this temple as a volunteer to help the monks out. And he's from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, nonetheless. And he got pretty irate at us for trying to witness to these people. And I finally told him, look, these guys are asking us questions. We're just giving them answers. Why are you interrupting? And then he didn't answer, and he proceeded to say, how did that conversation go? He proceeded to say something like, if you can't see it, then it's not real. And that's the Buddhist mindset. Like you see this podium, then it's real. You can believe in it. You see the trees, it's real. You can believe in it. He said, you can't see God, therefore God isn't real. And by this time, he really got my goat. And so I asked him, well, can you see air? And can you see oxygen? And so I said, it must not be real, so why don't you try not breathing? Yeah, the conversation ended, and I don't think I was the best witness to Christ at that time. But he really rubbed me wrong. At this same monk chat, at a different time, we interacted with another monk. He spoke very good English, and I just thought his worldview really was accurate, portrayed accurately the worldview of most Buddhists. And he said, you don't know where you come from, you don't know how you came into existence, you don't know what's going to happen to you after death, and the only thing you can actually know is what's right in the present today. And he said, you don't need to know, he doesn't want to know, and you can't know. And I said, okay. I said, and by this time I had talked to him about the Christianity and the gospel and the world and our worldview and things about life and death and suffering and things like that. And I said, okay, let's pretend, for example, that you're right and I'm wrong. You're doing good deeds to eliminate suffering and hopefully you can get to nirvana. I'm living righteously because I'm a Christian. If you're right and I'm wrong, the worst that can happen to me is I go to nirvana. But if I'm right and you're wrong, the worst thing that can happen to me is I go to heaven and you end up in hell. And I'd never met anybody so arrogant, and he just said, well, he believes that whatever happens to him in this life, if he follows Buddhist teaching, it'll prepare him for the next life, even if that's hell. And that was an extreme, arrogant monk, but that does summarize their worldview, pretty much. Not all the monks were that negative. Those were just a few extreme examples. A lot of monks we had very positive conversations with, especially the younger monks. I was surprised to see how young monks actually were, and from young teenagers, 13, 14 years old on up. And I asked them, why do you become monks? And answers vary. Some of them, they're pressured to by their parents because they want to gain merit. Some of them are genuinely interested in searching for answers to life. Some of them just simply want free education and room and board. And so a lot of monasteries will give them education, college education, if they come and train for a monk for a few years. Majority of them, once they're kind of tired of the monk lifestyle and all the rules, they'll leave and go back to their normal lifestyle. So how do you witness to a monk? Or how do you witness to a Buddhist? Or how do you witness to someone that has been influenced by Buddhism? For one thing, Buddhists have no concept of God. So telling them that God loves them it has very little meaning, because they don't even, to them that's such a foreign idea that there is a deity. They believe that desire, both positive and negative, is the cause for all suffering. So the concept that Christians desire or long for God is something they absolutely cannot connect with. It has no natural appeal to them at all, as opposed to someone like that would come from Judaism or someone that would come from a Muslim background. You know, John 3:16, for God so loved the world, it might be a good starting point for in most mission contexts, but for a Buddhist, it's not only irrelevant, but it oftentimes can almost turn them off. They just kind of block you out because they think the idea of God just doesn't exist to them. What I found was relationship is the key. And so going to a monk chat, sitting down, talking to them, you ask them questions, become interested in them as people. You know, who they are, where are they from, what's their families, and their hobbies, their interests. And then you kind of can guide that conversation to, okay, what is Buddhism, and what do you believe about Buddhism? And it varies so much from monk to monk. It's very subjective. I mean, one monk or one Buddhist can believe this, one Buddhist can believe that. It's kind of whatever you want. In fact, one monk told me, you can be a Christian Buddhist, you can be a Muslim Buddhist, you can be an atheist Buddhist. He said it's not a religion, it's a lifestyle. But one thing that always came through, there was several things that regardless of where they were at with Buddhism, there was a couple of things that always came through. One was that they feared death, and they didn't know what was coming after death. The second one was that they believed all desire was wrong, and they believed that they needed to eliminate suffering to find peace. And none of them had ever achieved that at that point in their life. And when they told me those things, that's when I said, wow, that's very different from what I believe. And most of the time, especially the younger ones, they would say, what do you believe? And that opened up a door to tell them about Christ, the gospel, to tell them about how the Bible does have answers that they're seeking out. You know, they fear death. Well, I don't have to fear death because I know exactly what's coming after death. You know, they try to follow this certain set of rules and guidelines to eliminate evil desires, and I tell them, Christ changes my desires from evil to good, to righteous. You know, I don't have to work for that anymore because that's Christ working in me. You know, their desire or they're trying to eliminate suffering to gain peace, I can say, I've already achieved that peace, regardless of that suffering. And so many times, especially in I would say the young ones from teenagers to early 20s, there was so many times like a light bulb moment for them. And here was something that actually provided answers that they didn't have, that Buddhism didn't have for them. Granted, they didn't convert right then and there, but it was so interesting. You could see when that light bulb moment would go off, and they would start to think, and they would start to process what you're telling them. So yeah, that's kind of my experiences in Thailand and working and interacting with Buddhists. So, yep, that.
All right, thank you very much, Marcus, for filling us in on just your practical experience working with Buddhists, trying to work with a person who believes in something like monism and trying to convert them over to the idea of monotheism, of an actual God and so on. That is a huge, not just like religious switch, but a worldview switch and a philosophy switch. And so the process of doing something like that is very, very long and complex. But thank you for giving us some tips and tricks on how to do that and how to get started. One thing that I failed to mention earlier is that, like, most Buddhists believe in the cycle of reincarnation. You die, you might come back as something else. Again, varies a lot from place to place. And usually whenever you believe in this reincarnation idea, you can earn what type of next life you get based on how well you do in your current life. And so it's the idea of karma. And so many Buddhists believe in karma, and so some things that I'm sure Marcus ran into and other people have run into as well when working with Buddhists is that they're so nice. They're so incredibly nice because they don't ever want to offend possibly, or at least not drastically, offend or earn themselves negative karma points in preparation for whatever comes next, even though they often don't know, like Marcus was saying. And so it can be hard to minister because of that, and also because of how different their worldview is from ours. But again, it is the call that God has given to us. All right, we are going to take a quick break. Go ahead and stand, stretch your legs for about 2 minutes, and then we will draw our